Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
And let's start with what's going on in the United States right now. Two candidates. Many people are thinking that maybe Trump would be better for the conflict in Ukraine. On the other hand, we have people who are hoping that Kamala Harris is better or would be better for the conflict in the Middle East. Nobody hopes that anything good happen in terms of what's going on between the United States and China. What's your take on this special day that the United States is going to decide about who's going to be the next president of the United States?
First of all, there's a third candidate out there, Jill Stein, and the only reason why I bring her up is that she's not going to be president of the United States. But we take a look at the two choices we have, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and these are horrible choices. They're not literally. I mean, this is an embarrassment for the United States of America, the nation of 320, 40 million citizens, and this is what we can produce. This shows that the duopoly, the dual party system, is fundamentally broken because this is horrible. That neither one is a quality candidate. Neither one could actually run and win. If either one of them ran for town supervisor here, none of them would get up there because they're not qualified. And yet we're going to make them president. One of them is going to be president of the United States. So a vote for Jill Stein would be a vote for, if she can get 5%, to inject a third party into the national mix, which is very well needed. I have to tell you that if there was a viable third party with guaranteed access to all ballots, it would have fundamentally changed the nature of this. First of all, the third party would have picked a viable candidate. I mean, with all due respect to Jill, she's not a viable candidate. But if you're going to be on the ballot, then they would pick a serious candidate. And having a third candidate in there to inject a third point of view, especially when the points of view of the other two candidates are just awful. The other two candidates would have to adjust, and then we get some quality inserted into this. So there's a need for a third party, and Jill Stein is a candidate on many state ballots, and that is a viable vote. That is not a throwaway vote. That is a viable vote for democracy. So I'll put that out there. But when I think of the other two, I think of the movie Endgame. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Marvel, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and there's a scene there after Thanos, the enemy, has snapped his finger, and everybody's going to die. And the question is, Doctor Strange does his little goes forward in time and does 14 million options, and Iron Man asks him, how many options did you go? And he said 14 million something. He said, and how many of those did we win? He said, one. And then later on in the movie, the big battle's up, and Iron Man says, you saw 14 million. Tell me, this is the one. And he says, if I tell you, it'll never happen. And then later on, there's an exchange where Doctor Strange holds up one finger, and Iron Man realizes what he's asking, and he puts on the glove, and he says, I am Iron, and reverses it. That's where we're at today. Literally, a vote for, let me just be as blunt as possible. A vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for nuclear war. I have run through the options. She's horrible on foreign policy. She's going to surround herself with horrible people. She doesn't have an end game for Iran. She doesn't have an end game for Ukraine, Russia. She will, I will create the most lethal military in the world. I mean, that's her foreign policy direction. And so no matter what, within 6 months to a year, there is a real potential that we will be in a nuclear war if Kamala Harris is elected president. So she's not an option. I don't even want to discuss any of the other issues. The end of the world as we know it is not an option. I'm not voting for that. But then I look at Donald Trump and I'm just like, this guy's horrible. He's not much better. He's worse on some issues. But then that Doctor Strange moment comes in. He holds up one finger. You have one chance, 1 in 14 million. And instead of Iron Man saying, I am Iron Man, it would be, I am voting for Donald Trump. It's a horrible option. It kills him. It's not a good option. But it may be the only option we have as Americans. is to vote for Donald Trump, because a vote for Kamala Harris, we're going to die. I've projected through, there's no one can talk me out of it. There's no one that can articulate. There's no one that's willing to articulate. She was not willing to articulate. She did not engage on this. At least Donald Trump had the, ability to say nuclear war is bad. She won't even say that. He recognizes the conflict with Ukraine could go nuclear. Therefore, we need to end it. At least he says that. He doesn't say how he's going to do it. And when he does say it, it's unrealistic. Remember, 14 million chances and only one works. And there's no guarantee that Donald Trump's going to pick that one. There's 13,999,999 options that he could pick that will end up getting a nuclear war. But Donald Trump's the only viable candidate, where you get that one shot at survival. And so that's where we're at today. This is horrible. This is not a good day for America. This is a national embarrassment for America, because we've put ourselves in this situation. As I said, Donald Trump couldn't win an election for town supervisor. Couldn't, because here at the local level, we actually hold our town supervisors accountable for the issues. And the town supervisor better know the issues inside and out. You don't get to get up there and be mealy-mouthed and all this very specific, like, how are you going to fix the pothole on 8th and Adams? And the town supervisor better know that there is a pothole and the history of that pothole and every pothole in the town, or else they're not going to be town supervisor. What about leaf removal? How come the leaf removal machine didn't show up on time last Thursday? They better know all about leaf removal, the politics behind it, why that machine didn't work, maintenance, what we're doing to fix it. Donald Trump can't answer any of these questions, and neither can Kamala Harris. Neither one of them could win a local election. Neither one of them could win a local election, and yet we're going to vote one of them to be the president of the United States. This is a disgrace, an absolute national disgrace. And it's come down to a meme. One chance to save America. I am Iron Man. Come on, man. That's not really what it should be, but that's where we're at.
You mentioned the risk of having a nuclear war. I assume that you're talking about the conflict between the United States and Russia in Ukraine. But when it comes to the Middle East, do you see any sort of difference between these two candidates?
No. And when I talk about a nuclear war, I'm also talking about a nuclear war that involves starting out as a nuclear conflict between Israel and Iran. The United States is on record, both parties. We will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Well, too bad. Iran already has one. They have the potential for one, and you can't stop it. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to nuke Iran? Hell, we got 6 nuclear-capable B-52s deployed in the region right now. We're going to nuke Iran? And you think that stops it? You think by us nuking Iran, somehow that stops it? It doesn't stop anything. It begins a process that ends up with the world ending. Once nuclear weapons are used, it's all over. So neither one of them has a solution for the Middle East. I will say, whereas Kamala Harris goes to simple, simplistic, Democrat, talking points, Iran is the greatest threat to American national security today. That's her thing. She's stupid. She doesn't even know how to spell Iran. I don't think she can point the capital on the city. She doesn't know where Isfahan is, doesn't know what Natanz is. She doesn't know anything, but it's the greatest threat to America today. At least Trump would say, we could get along with them. At least he said that. Can he do it? I don't know. History suggests not. He's the one who withdrew from the JCPOA, but he claimed it was to get a better deal. He's a deal maker. So there's a chance, again, I am Iron Man. That kind of chance, 1 in 14 million, that he's going to do the right thing. But at least Trump's gut inclinations are business oriented, meaning to make a deal that allows America to thrive economically. That's his foundation. It's simplistic. It's who knows if it can work. Many people say it can't work. But Kamala Harris's thing is, Iran is the greatest threat to the national security of the United States, and I'm going to create the most lethal military in the force and in the world. And therefore, if Iran's causing a problem, nuke them. And that's just not an option I'm willing to vote in favor of. Nor should any American, to be honest. Just to be frankly honest, no American should vote for Kamala Harris. Because I don't care what your issue is. I'm a woman. I believe in women's rights. Yay, you're going to be dead. You're going to be dead. It won't matter. You won't be able to have the abortion you want to have because you won't reach your trimester because Kamala Harris is going to get you killed in a nuclear holocaust. Donald Trump may very well do the same, but at least there's the I am Iron Man moment where he might, 1 in 14 million, get us out of it. This is horrible. This is a horrible situation we find ourselves in. Horrible. Absolutely horrible.
We've heard last time we talked, I asked you if Iran would attack Israel, would respond to Israel or not. You said you don't know yet, but we've learned from the Iranian leader and Iranian president. Iranian leader said they're going to respond to Israel, but the president of Iran said their main goal is what's going on in Gaza. Their main focus is what's going on in Gaza. If they can get some sort of negotiation, ceasefire in Gaza, that is so much important for Iran than a response from Iran to Israeli attack. Right now, when you look at this situation in the Middle East, what's your assessment?
It's the same way. I mean, strategically speaking, for Iran to attack Israel is the dumbest thing in the world. Because right now, Iran can end the cycle of violence between Iran and Israel. Bring it into it, cap it. Everybody knows the Israeli strike against Iran was pathetic. Everybody knows Iran can level Israel. So, you can have Israel saying things, you can have the Western media saying, but the people who know, the people who count, they know exactly what the score is. And as the Iranian president said, the number one priority for Iran has always been, in this case, supporting Hamas. And even though the situation is absolutely dire for the Palestinian people, Israel's not winning. Israel's losing. There's not a single metric out there that has Israel winning. Not one. Challenge anybody to send me one thing. Economically, no, their economy's collapsing. Tourism, done. They had to shut down Terminal 1. Nobody's flying in. No tourist economy. Nobody's investing in Israel. Nobody wants to build. Israelis are fleeing. They're fleeing their homes in northern Israel. They can't return to their homes. They're being bombarded. Israel, nobody's coming in. Nobody wants to be part of this. Israeli political commentators are talking about Israel in a near civil war state, fighting amongst themselves. Reservists are committing suicide rather than joining up. Desertion rates between 12 and 24% in certain units. They're not beating Hamas. They're not beating Hezbollah. They can't beat Iran. Where is Israel winning? And they're not. And the fact of the matter is, with this trajectory going the way it is, Israel will cease to exist as a viable national state in a year. Some people give them less than a year. Some people say they might be able to make it a couple years. But Israel, as we know, it's over. It's finished. The world has abandoned Israel. Israel will never recover global approval for the state of Israel. The fact is, the world is insisting now on a Palestinian state, which is something, of course, this current iteration of the Israeli government says they will never accept, which is why they're collapsing, because they've boxed themselves into a corner with no way out. So if I'm an Iranian, I'm sitting there, yeah, I mean, I'm mad. You killed 4 of my soldiers, you killed a civilian, I'm going to do it. But I'm also looking there going, Israel's defeating itself. Why do I want to do anything that gives Israel a way out? Because expanding the war is actually good for Israel, because it changes the focus on Gaza. It changes the focus now to global stability, and everybody will be intervening to stop this war. And it'll be an intervention that is designed to preserve Israel's status as a nation state, to inject security into the mix. Iran doesn't want that. Nobody who is against Israel wants that. So the best thing to do is just sit back, continue to support Hamas, continue to support Hezbollah, and let Israel kill itself, because that's what Israel's doing, killing itself.
You've mentioned B-52s in Qatar right now. Do you think that is the United States concerned about what's going on between Iran and Israel? It is because they want to defend Israel, or they feel that something going to happen in that region? That's why they send these, if I'm not mistaken, 6 B-52s bombers.
B-52s. Yeah, they're at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the most vulnerable air base in the world. Iran can eliminate that air base instantaneously. It's the stupidest deployment I've ever seen in my entire life. If you want to make B-52s viable, put them on Diego Garcia. Then they can launch. There's no Iranian missiles that can strike them. They can launch. They can approach Iran, release their missiles from a safe distance, hit any target they want. Why would you put them so close to Iran that Iran can use any mix of missiles? There's nothing we can do to defend against Iran's missiles, and they can take it out. So it's a presence. 6 B-52s. I mean, by themselves, it's nothing. You know, you're going to put cruise missiles on there. How many cruise missiles are in the drum? You know, a dozen. So yay, they can fire what, 60, 70 cruise missiles. That's nothing. Nothing. You know how many cruise missiles we fired against Syria to take out, you know, when we did that little strike against their nuclear or against their chemical weapons, their non-existent chemical weapons site? It was a lot, and it accomplished nothing. The cruise missile isn't, you know, conventionally armed cruise missile isn't what people think it is. It can be shot down, it can be jammed, it can be spoofed, and it can just fail. And so, what are we doing with them? We're going to use nuclear. In order to be a nuclear capable, they got to have nuclear weapons on the ground in Al Udeid Air Base. You think the Gulf Arabs are going to let America put nuclear weapons on the ground on their soil? That ain't going to happen. So what is the purpose of this? It's a presence. It's a show of force. I don't think Iran's losing 1 hour of sleep over this. It's a joke. It's stupid. You can't even use them. They'll get shot down. They'll get blown up. It makes no sense.
How about the way that the government in Israel and Netanyahu, do you think they send these bombers because of the leverage, because of the pressure that they're receiving from Netanyahu?
No.
Because the Pentagon, at the end of the day, we know that
the Pentagon's not getting any pressure from Netanyahu. Netanyahu can't pressure the Pentagon. Let's remember this. As much as the Israel lobby controls American politics, at the end of the day, Israel has no leverage over the American military, none whatsoever. And the idea that Israel is going to leverage the American military to do something is ignorant. Isn't going to happen. We sent the B-52s because we wanted to send the B-52s, not because Israel did. We're trying to, show Israel that we're here for you. But that's our decision. And I have to tell you, I know the Israelis. I've worked with them. As much as I despise their Zionistic state and I hate their policies and all that, these are military professionals. They're not stupid. And they're going to say the same thing I'm going to say. 6 B-52s in Al Udeid Air Base. What the hell are you thinking? They're vulnerable. They're sitting there, sitting ducks. If the United States wants to threaten Iran, that's not the way to do it. It's stupid. It's really an ignorant deployment. But it just shows you how desperate and shallow the Biden administration is when it comes to managing this problem.
Scott, how did you find these leaks of Israeli intelligence, which is related to Netanyahu and his office in Israel? And what's your take? What was the reason behind this?
Are you talking about the Hamas documents?
Yeah. The leak of Israeli intelligence that it seems that they wanted to just stop the ceasefire, the negotiations.
Yeah. Look, somebody inside the Netanyahu government is, first of all, we know that Netanyahu is not a well-loved leader right now. There's been multiple Israeli officials who have been saying what I've been saying all along. Israel's on the verge of a civil war, an absolute internal shoot-'em-up civil war. The society is divided deeply, and Netanyahu is deeply despised by many, especially those in the military, who look at him and say, you don't have a strategy, you don't have a plan, it's all about saving you, it's not about saving Israel. And so there are people who leak this information to embarrass Netanyahu, to expose him as a liar, etc., to show that he's not the solution, that there could have been a ceasefire, the hostages could be home by now. Netanyahu sought the blame of Hamas, but he's the one to blame. He's the responsible one. That's the reality of it. And that's what these documents show. So somebody leaked them to embarrass Netanyahu.
In the southern part of Lebanon, Scott, we've seen a village here. Let me show you. They bombed a village. You see all of the houses here are just exploding at the same time. And do you think that it's all about the Hezbollah strongholds? Because the way they're talking about it, It's unbelievable the way that they're attacking, they're destroying everything.
Yeah, it's a
And
war crime. Look, Nazi Germany did it. In Czechoslovakia, they went around and leveled villages. They did it in France. They did it in Russia. This is what Nazis do. This is what war criminals do. This is what criminal regimes do. There's no legal basis for them to do what they just did. None whatsoever. It's collective punishment of the worst sort. And the world, isn't doing a damn thing about it. That's the reality. The United States isn't. Again, we have become a nation that I don't even recognize anymore. What we do, we have a State Department spokesman who laugh at at the fact that Israel has ignored the 30-day deadline the United States placed on them for humanitarian. Well, I mean, we're not ready to give them a grade yet. Why are you laughing? They're starving people to death. You're the ones who said that they can't do it, but they're doing it now. What are you going to do about it? And all you have is a laugh and a stupid look on your face. But that's America. We're a nation that laughs and has a stupid look on our face. We're letting this happen. People ask themselves, Aaron Bushnell, the airman who burned himself to death in protest over Israel last February. He one of the things he said before he said, what would you do if you could go back in time and you lived in the time of Jim Crow, you lived in the time of the Nazis, you lived in the time of the worst atrocities ever? All the ones where people saying, well, we know it's bad, something should have been done. Well, what would you do? And then the answer is you're doing it right now. Because all these atrocities taking place, what would you do then is what you're doing now. Not a damn thing. Not a damn thing. So all those Americans that posture, that pretend to be somehow moral beings, that we're the good guys. No, we suck. We're the worst guys in the world because we could do something. We do have the power to intervene and stop. One phone call could end Netanyahu in this war. One phone call. Easy phone call to make. Bibi, we're cutting off all support on withdrawing the ambassador. All military units are withdrawn, and you're going to be on your own unless you do the following, and it has to be articulated publicly within the hour. That means you're going to read a teleprompter, what we wrote. You don't get a vote. Yes or no, because otherwise we're pulling out, we're not recognizing you, we're leaving to your own volition. Goodbye, Bibi. Have a good day. Easy phone call to make if we stood for anything, but we stand for nothing. We absolutely stand for nothing because every crime that Netanyahu is committing against the Palestinians, we've committed against others. Sometimes we spread our genocide out, but let's never forget that we starved the Iraqi people to death for over a decade. Madeleine Albright sat there and said, 500,000 dead Iraqi children because of sanctions, that's a price we're willing to pay. And she didn't get fired. She didn't get fired. She didn't get arrested. She didn't get put up on charges. Handful of people in America, well, that's a horrible thing to say, but she went on to be Secretary of State and went to Georgetown University and became a professor teaching the next generation of American diplomats about American morality. 500,000 Iraqi children's death is a price we're willing to pay. We illegally invaded and occupied Iraq and killed millions. That's okay. We're America. We can get away. So why would we ever speak up against it? Because what Israel is doing against the Palestinians, as horrible as it is, pales in comparison to what we've done to the world. We've killed millions. Millions we've killed. And nobody holds us to it. Not even ourselves. Not even ourselves. I know the world can't because we're too big. But we're the ones, we, the people of the United States of America, are the ones that are supposed to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard. And we're doing nothing. Aaron Bushnell was 100% correct. What would you do if you went back in time? The same thing you're doing now, which is absolutely nothing, because we stand for nothing.
yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with the film Pianist. Did you watch Pianist?
Yeah.
Here is a picture from what has happened in Lebanon. destroyed the same building. I remember the pictures from that movie, Scott. It's the same when you look at. It's the same.
It's the same. Look, the Israelis today are the second worst nation in the world. America's the worst nation in the world. Like I said, our crimes are on a scale beyond belief. But Israel's the second worst nation in the world. There's nothing good about Israel. Nothing. There's not one thing good about Israel. You can't name one. They allow this to happen. They are literally a walking, talking, meme generating machine, and all the memes are Nazi related. You know, every photo you see of Israeli troops walking through Gaza, you can find the Nazi equivalent of the German troops walking through destroyed Russian cities, rounding up the Palestinians. They round up the Jews. It's the same thing, the same mindset, the same crimes that are happening. But we're letting it happen. We could stop it. We, the United States, could stop this instantly. And we ought not to. Remember, it's a choice. It's not that we're powerless to do anything. It's a choice we've made. The American people are paralyzed right now. There's a handful of people who are bravely out there protesting in favor of Palestine, but they're derided by both sides. Derided. Donald Trump calls them terrorists. Donald Trump, he's the guy. I am Iron Man. I mean, again, remember, for the one thing that he might save us all, he's a moron on everything else. He assaults free speech. He claims that he's going to defend free speech. He claims he's going to do it because, you know, he has himself been subjected to attacks about free speech. And yet he says, if you demonstrate in favor of Hamas, he's going to deport you. Wait a minute. That's hate speech. Well, hate speech is free speech, Donald. I mean, this is the problem when you elect a moron to be president. He doesn't know the Constitution. He doesn't know anything about the Constitution. He couldn't tell you what the hell is in the Constitution. I would love to be a fly on the wall when he interviews Supreme Court justices to see kind of stupid, inane questions he asks them about the Constitution. The man is a moron, a literal moron about the Constitution. But Kamala's not better. Remember, she's the one, you know, with a stroke of the pen, I can ruin your life. I had that power with the stroke of the pen. I could have you arrested. I could have your life ruined. You may be innocent, but with a stroke of the pen, I could do it anyways. And then later I could decide to release you with the stroke of a pen. But your life would be ruined. And you want her to have control of the button. My God, these people couldn't be dog catcher. These people, I mean, dog catchers are supposed to be, you know, humane, at least treat the animals humanely. These people couldn't be anything. They literally couldn't run for local office and win. Literally couldn't. Remember, Kamala Harris is a DEI employee from the beginning. Even her attorney general, she's not qualified for that job. You can't be when you have that mindset with the stroke of a pen. She is a Nazi disguise. That's what Nazis talk about, with a stroke of a pen, that kind of power. And Donald Trump's no better. And I mean, that's where we're at today. But, you know, Israel is a nation that has literally lost the right to exist. Literally, there's no legal justification for the continuation of the state of Israel. It's an aberration against humanity. And thankfully, the forces of history are conspiring right now to erase Israel. And again, if the Iranians are listening, don't attack. Don't attack. Because all you do is empower the beast. The beast is dying. Let it die.
Those people who are still hoping that Donald Trump may do something in terms of these conflicts, at the same time, they're afraid of people like Mike Pompeo, and maybe he would be the head of Pentagon. How about that, Scott? Do you think, is there any possibility out there he become the head of Pentagon?
You know, again, we're down to, I am Iron Man. I mean, that's it. 1 in 14 million. So everything you're mentioning, they're not the one. Appointing Mike Pompeo Secretary of Defense is not the one thing that saves America. It's the thing that kills America. It's one of those millions of options that will get America going down the wrong path. Donald Trump has told people like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard that they are going to be involved in the transition team, and they will have a say. Donald Trump says he learned his lesson with Joe Rogan. I learned my lesson. I was new at governing. I surrounded myself with people that were horrible. I've learned my lesson now. And then he stands up and praises Mike Pompeo last night. He didn't learn a damn thing. We'll find out. If Mike Pompeo plays any role in this administration, there will be no Iron Man moment. It's over. It's finished. He has to be purged, and everybody like him has to be purged. Maybe this is an electioneering moment where he's saying things to bring in the Pompeo vote. And then once he gets elected, he will turn his back on that, which he must do if we're going to have that Iron Man chance. Mike Pompeo is an enemy of America. He's the enemy of the world. He's an enemy of free speech. He's an enemy of freedom. This is a man who chuckled when he, his director of the CIA. We lied, we cheated, we stole, we killed. Yay! No, that's not good, Mike. It's not good. Not to chuckle about it. There might be, extreme situations where extreme things have to be done for the good of America, but we don't laugh about it. It's not an honor to lie. It's not an honor to cheat. It's not an honor to steal. It's not an honor to kill. And yet he's so trivial about this. And remember, he's the man that stabbed, together with John Bolton, stabbed Trump in the back when it came to the denuclearization of North Korea. Trump had a deal on the table he was ready to take. Imagine if he had. Today we're talking about North Korean troops in Russia, North Korea having missiles and nuclear weapons and the potential war. Imagine if Donald Trump had actually succeeded in denuclearizing North Korea, and we had good relations and had the economic interaction that North Korea was engaged in today was with the West, not with Russia. Imagine that. We can't, because Mike Pompeo stabbed Donald Trump in the back.
In your opinion, because when you look at Mike Pompeo, he's personally involved in Ukraine. He has his personal interest in what's going on in Ukraine. This is so much important when you talk about him. With telecom, I think he has some stocks there. He's part of the company in Ukraine, and in the Middle East. He's totally in favor of Israel. But if you were to decide Donald Trump right now, the mindset of Donald Trump right now, we can imagine that he wants to gain more votes, to win more votes. That's why he's talking about Mike Pompeo. But does he have any sort of political importance for Donald Trump to mention him, in your opinion, just to win more votes? Not in the aftermath of the election, he's not going to consider Mike Pompeo to be part of his administration. But right now, he needs to say that. Can we?
I personally think that he could have ignored Mike Pompeo and not paid a price. But again, I'm not in on their campaign. I don't know their strategies. I don't know how they're counting votes. I don't know where they put priorities. I don't know anything. I would think that maybe they don't know either. Because Donald Trump isn't a man that ever would have the discipline to, allow a well thought out plan to be executed around him. I think Donald Trump is just a gut action person. And at the moment, he felt that it was the thing to say, so he said it. But he has to understand that, for instance, all the people who are Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. Supporters who are, flocking to the Trump campaign right now, they won't support Mike Pompeo, and it's a turnoff. It's an absolute turnoff for them to think that Trump would even consider bringing such a person in. So I don't know what goes on in Donald. Like I said, Donald Trump couldn't run and win an election as a town supervisor because he's stupid. And so why should I suddenly, if I believe that, and I truly do believe that, why should I suddenly impart some sort of Jedi Knight master chess player thinking to his reason for calling out Mike Pompeo? Why don't we just accept the fact that Donald Trump is dumber than dirt, stupid, and he does things on a reactive basis, and there's no real logic behind anything he does? I think that's the more accurate answer to evaluate anything Donald Trump says than trying to impart, oh, well, this is a very careful, clever move that Donald Trump's making to preserve this aspect of the electorate in this particular constituency to offset this, that, and the other. No, He doesn't think that way. He just gets up there and says whatever the hell comes across his mind. That's it.
We've learned that Israel is pulling several brigades out of the southern part of Lebanon after destroying these dozens of towns in the southern part of Lebanon. Do you think that are they sending these people just to take some rest, or they're going to continue with the same kind of mindset again, sending more forces to the southern part of Lebanon, or they're changing their strategy in the southern part?
Sounds to me like Israel's been beaten. They were supposed to have advanced 20 kilometers deep, taken all this territory, kicking Hezbollah's butt. And Hezbollah's standing fast. Israel's taking a pounding, and they're pulling out. If you want to watch more Israeli soldiers commit suicide, pull these brigades out and tell them, now you have to go right back in and fight over the same terrain that you just left. So you're not pulling the Israeli troops out to send them back in. Pulling them out because you lost. You lost. They haven't been engaged that long. I mean, this is the problem with the Israeli military. They don't know how to fight. They don't know how to do campaigns. They are geared towards short, sharp conflicts. In, mess it up, get out. But to have an actual grueling campaign where you have to slog it out, dig Hezbollah out of there, foxhole by foxhole, tunnel by tunnel, pound it out like we did. Go back and study the Italian campaign. When the Americans were in Italy and fighting the lead up to Monte Cassino, and the kind of fighting was taking place in the mountains, in the hills, in the valleys of Italy. Bloody, bloody fighting. Israel can't do that. Their military isn't geared towards that. They would collapse in a heartbeat because they can't take the casualties. They can't absorb those casualties and survive. A real military can take a licking and keep on ticking. It's not a good thing, but you take the United States Army, take the United States Marine Corps, put them in a situation like that. We don't quit. We just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going until the mission's accomplished. And there's a lot of dead bodies back there, ours and theirs, but we will accomplish that mission. Israel can't do that. They're in there right now. They're crying. This is an army of men who weep at funerals. That's not a crime to weep at funerals, but this is a very emotionally demonstrative group of people. They can't handle the losses. They can't go, too bad, we lost Sergeant Smith today. We'll have a ceremony for him later, but then boom, we move on, keep on with the mission. Or sometimes you don't get Sergeant Smith back. Sergeant Smith was blown up in a foxhole, but you keep advancing and somebody else has to recover that body, because it's war. But no, the Israelis, everybody has to be pulled back. There's a big funeral, wailing, gnashing of the teeth, pulling of the hair. Societies can't survive with that kind of with that kind of pain and suffering. Israel can't continue this war the way they're fighting it.
These people who are living in Israel, who have been living in Israel during this conflict more than a year in Israel, do you think mostly are from the northern part of Israel who are not happy, or it doesn't matter from all over Israel they're living in Israel?
I mean, the north has been evacuated, many up to 60,000. I think that number's probably gone up. Of course, there's the Gaza people, but that's disruptive to central Israel as well. And now central Israel is being hit by rockets on an everyday basis. During the early stage of the war, if you were in the Tel Aviv, the central area, your life was largely untouched. Today, a day doesn't go by where the alarm doesn't go off and you have to hit the ground and cower in fear. This is disruptive. Remember, Israel's supposed to be the land of milk and honey, and it's not. It's now the land of getting no sleep and low quality life because constant fear of inbound rockets.
Do you want to look at your dog if something wrong?
There's FedEx delivery trucks going back and forth, so there's not much I can do about it.
No problem. It's so good to hear. And Scott, right now, I think the main goal, as I mentioned, from Iranian position and from Lebanese people, from Hezbollah, is what's going on in Gaza. It's unbelievable, and nobody knows what would happen in the aftermath. And when we discover how many people were killed, were murdered, were assassinated in Gaza by starving the people, bombing the people, and all of these type of torturing people of Gaza.
You think it matters? How many? You think people care? You think people really care? I'm not talking about the superficiality of it. Oh, I care. Oh, it's horrible to see another dead body of a dead Palestinian child. Oh my God, it's horrible. Nobody's doing a damn thing. Nothing. Zero. Nobody cares. We get, people get emotional about it for a moment. They don't care. If you cared, you'd mobilize, go over, cross the line of departure, and bayonet to death every single Israeli soldier committing these crimes. That's what you would do if you truly cared. We don't care. Nobody cares. Hezbollah cares. They're making sacrifice. Hamas is fighting like, big fight. But we can't even speak about Hamas in a normal fashion. Piers Morgan will say, well, do you condemn Hamas? And all the cowards that go up there say, Piers, that's not right. The answer is hell no. I praise Hamas. I support Hamas. I endorse everything Hamas does. The more dead Israelis, the better is the appropriate response. Isn't that the appropriate response about Nazis? I mean, would anybody complain in 1943 if I said the appropriate response for dealing with Nazi atrocities against the Jews, the Russians, everybody else is more dead Nazis? Everybody go, hell yeah, good. Well, here we got it right happening right in front of our eyes. The same damn thing. There's no difference between the Israelis and the Nazis. None. Listen to the rhetoric of the Israeli politicians. We ignore it, but it's there. They say it broad, straight up. These are animals. Slaughter them. They're talking about starving them to death. You have Israeli generals driving through talking about committing crimes, and nobody's doing anything. Nothing. What we should be doing is targeting those Israeli generals. Put a cruise missile up their butt because they're criminals. We're all about sending drones out to kill high-value targets and terrorist groups around the world. Israel is a terrorist nation, literally by definition. And we're not doing anything. So I'm sick and tired of people talking about the poor, suffering Palestinian people. It's just a gimmick for you. You don't really care. If you did care, you'd be saying things and demanding things be done. But even those people who claim to care sort of get all nervous when they say, well, do you condemn Hamas? Well, I mean, that's not really the question. Now, should it be the question? Rip into them. Don't condemn Hamas. If you support the Palestinian people, then you must support Hamas. If you believe the Palestinian people have a right for a statehood, then you must support the people fighting for that statehood. If you think the Israelis are committing crimes, then you must support the people who are fighting the criminal entity known as Israel. But how many people have the goddamn courage to stand up and say, I support Hamas? Bring all your guests on. Every single one of them. Ask them, do you support Hamas? Watch how freaking nervous they get. Watch how nervous they get.
Yeah.
And then you know the answer. Nobody gives a goddamn about the Palestinian people. Because if you can't say I support Hamas, you don't care about the Palestinian people. That's the God's honest truth.
You mentioned that the United States is in a position to influence what Israel is doing in that region. Who else is in that position, in your opinion?
Everybody who does business with Israel. Starve Israel to death. Come on, Turkey, shut off the oil. Just stop doing business with Israel. Stop it. Israel is an illegal entity. Stop doing business. Make it illegal for airplanes to fly into Israel. Make it illegal for ships to disembark in Israel. Make it illegal to do any economic interaction with Israel. Sanction Israeli banks, deny them access to the SWIFT system like we did with the Russian banks. We could do it. Europe could do it. Anybody could do it. Nobody does it. Which tells you again what the world really thinks about the Palestinian people. I mean, it breaks my heart to say this, but we just don't care. We don't. We don't, because if we did, we'd do something. But we're doing nothing but yank, 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 yank.
Do you think that I've mentioned what's going on in Gaza because I wanted to come to a point that whenever we talk about the conflict between Iran and Israel, it seems that it's a conflict merely between Iran and Israel. And nobody seems to care about the main reason is Gaza. The main reason of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon is Gaza. None of these countries have. We know that Lebanon, some part of Lebanon, Israeli have just they captured some parts of Lebanon. But at the end of the day, the main reason in the mind of Iran and Lebanon is what's going on in Gaza. In your opinion, why in the mainstream media, whenever they're talking about the conflict between Iran and Israel, it seems that is an isolated conflict. It doesn't it's not connected to what's going on in that region and what's the behavior of Israelis in Gaza, in Lebanon, even against Syria.
Well, the mainstream media is incapable of calling Israel out for the war criminal enterprise that it is. I mean, there's articles here, there. I mean, the Israeli press is amazing. Haaretz and others they're saying the right things. But we can't get the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, LA Times. You can't get them to write articles that speak realistically about the crimes that Israel is, because they're owned by people who are part of the pro-Israeli lobby, and so they're not going to, and therefore the last thing they want to do is give legitimacy to the Iranian position or the Hezbollah position, because the position of Hezbollah and Iran are the most legitimate positions out there. They are doing this in support of Hamas and the Palestinian people. No one else is. Hezbollah and Iran is. This is why Nasrallah did escalation management. He didn't allow this thing to turn into a full-scale fight between Hezbollah and Israel, because he said that's not what this is about. This is about Hamas. This is about Gaza. This is about Palestine, and we're supporting them. But if we turn this into a full-scale war, then that's all anybody talks about is the Israeli Hezbollah thing, and they don't make that linkage there because the West won't make that linkage, because to make that linkage implies that Hamas might actually be doing something right, that Hamas are the good guys, not the bad guys, that Hamas has a legitimate struggle for the statehood of the aspirations of Palestinian statehood. They don't want to talk about that. They will propagate Israeli propaganda. They'll allow these Israeli propagandists, these spokespersons, to get up there and spout their nonsense without question. As if Israel, Israel will allow humanitarian. Who the hell is Israel to allow humanitarian goods into Palestine? Who gave them that right? They are an illegal occupying entity. That's it. They're colonizers. Find me one newspaper that will say that truth. One. They won't. So that's the problem. We're incapable of dealing with this issue on a fact-based, moral-based approach. We've bought into the Israeli nonsense, the lies, and we articulate them, we repeat them, we suppress the truth, we expand the lies, and in many ways, the Iranian-Israeli conflict is a much-needed distraction, because they sure as hell would rather write about Iranian ballistic missile development and how that came about and why we allowed that to happen than write about the righteousness of Hamas's cause in Gaza today.
How much of what's going on in Israel right now is because of Netanyahu and his administration? Do you think that any sort of change in Israel would cause any sort of difference within the society in Israel, or we are not still at that point that we can say the change in the leadership may change the concept, the mindset of the people of Israel?
You're never going to change the mindset of the people of Israel. They're sick people. They're ill. There's a handful of people there that give lip service to the need for a Palestinian state, but the vast majority of them are Zionists who excuse all the crimes that are taking place, who believe that the Palestinians are wrong, who don't believe in Palestinian statehood, who say the same thing that Netanyahu is, but they're against Netanyahu because he's losing, because he's failing. All right. But, it isn't as though if you got rid of Netanyahu, suddenly Israel would wake up overnight and go, well, we welcome the Palestinians in with open arms. No, they condemned them. they'll continue the same policies, supporting the settlements, etc. Israel is a sick nation, populated by a sick people, people who are diseased in the mind by Zionism. That's the reality. It's a sad reality, but it's the reality nonetheless. This isn't the days of Yitzhak Rabin, where you had a significant percentage of Israelis who were willing to consider peaceful options, the existence of Palestinian state, as necessary. Not today. Those people don't even exist politically in Israel anymore. So, Netanyahu, there are people who could bring about a ceasefire to get the hostages back. But the second you say, and now we move on to create a Palestinian state, they're like, no, not so fast. See, they're against Netanyahu because he's losing, because he's a loser, because Israel's suffering. But who are they going to replace him with? Whoever replaces him will still be the same at the end of the day, the same, infected with the same disease of Zionism. And then that inevitably leads to the same conflict. Until you accept the absolute necessity for a Palestinian state that is equal to Israel in terms of all the rights, then there will be no peaceful solution to this problem. And from the Israeli perspective, that's an impossibility, because in order for there to be that Palestinian state, you would have to dismantle the West Bank settlements. Good luck. That will lead to the civil war that's brewing right now. Israel can't survive. Israel has boxed itself into a corner. There is no getting out of this alive. That's the harsh truth.
We've learned that Russia has launched 2 Iranian satellites into orbit, Kosar and Hotod. It seems that Kosar is a high-resolution imaging satellite, and Hotod is Iran's first communication satellite. How do you think that? How important are these 2 satellites in your opinion when it comes to the Iranian military?
Well, I don't know the full capabilities of these satellites, so it's impossible for me to say, what impact they have. Ideally, you want to have secure communications, and you want to have the ability to collect timely and accurate intelligence on potential adversaries, enemies, etc. These satellites appear to put Iran in that direction. Whether or not these satellites are mature enough from a technological standpoint to actually do things, I don't know. I'd have to look into the imaging satellite. Is it a geosynchronous orbit, or does it, go over an orbit? What is the, rate, the frequency in which it crosses over a potential target? What's the potential resolution of the cameras? Only then can you get a feel for it. And believe me, if I can do it, so can the Israelis and everybody else. It doesn't. I'm not going to get into it, but there's ways to collect intelligence about that satellite. You'll know exactly what it can and can't do, and then you adapt to it. It's the beginning of a direction. I think if you saw the Japanese and the Koreans, how they reacted when North Korea started putting satellites up, they hated it because it gave the North Koreans the ability to do instantaneous retargeting based upon moving targets of opportunity. And Iran now has the same capability, or at least is moving in that direction. And the communication satellite, again, I'd have to take a look at it. How many channels can it do? Digital encryption? Who knows? I don't know the capabilities of that satellite, but it's moving Iran in that direction. So, but one satellite, one communication satellite, one imaging satellite, you need more than that. But it's a step in the right direction from the Iranian perspective.
Whoever going to be the next president of the United States, do you think the sanctions would be an option for them to go against Iran and Russia? How do you see the power of sanctions right now after more than 2 years of sanction in Russia, Iran more than 43 years of sanction in Iran, a lot of sanctions on these 2 countries? How do you see, is it going to be the same type of policy against these 2 countries, or they're going to change the attitude?
Well, if it's a Kamala Harris regime, you'll see them double down on sanctions. There's no reverse gear here. They'll just continue to throw sanctions. This is what the Biden administration has done. It's the same, global outlook, the same approach that'll be under a Harris administration. So they'll just continue to sanction, which is one of the reasons why it'll be almost impossible to get a negotiated settlement in Ukraine, because one of the Russian insistences to bring it into this conflict is that all sanctions imposed on Russia since 2014 are lifted. It'll be very difficult for a Kamala Harris administration to do that. They're going to be actually trying to put more sanctions on, because, sanctions isn't really a policy. Sanctions is when you don't have a policy, when you don't know what to do, you sanction. It means we don't know how to solve this thing, so we're just going to sanction by time. He's seen as doing something. Trump has acknowledged in several forums that sanctions are destructive. I think Trump at least can get enough synapses firing in his brain to know that it's disruptive to global economic intercourse. That sanctions are bad for the dollar. They lead to a diminishment of the standing of the dollar. And they don't solve anything. They have never, he has said that, they don't solve anything. So Donald Trump has talked about, the tool of lifting sanctions and using that to do this. So of the two candidates, only one of them has articulated in any meaningful fashion the notion that sanctions are bad and should be lifted if you want to get a new policy direction, and that's Donald Trump. But again, whether or not he can actually pull it off, whether or not when the time comes he'll say, yeah, that's what that's what I'm going to do, or who's he going to surround himself with? How do you deal with Congress? Because you are going to have to engage Congress, and it's going to be a very difficult discussion if Congress continues to have a lot of these very conservative elements in there. How do you convince Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio to lift sanctions when they're the ones who've been seeking to strangle Russia and Iran with sanctions? So we'll go. But what we can say is that a Kamala Harris administration will continue sanctions, double down on stupid. We have an Iron Man chance with Donald Trump that he'll lift sanctions.
It seems that the European Union is in panic right now. They don't know if Donald Trump would win or not. There is an article in Politico. It says Europe's Trumpian nightmare. And it seems that they're thinking that even overnight, Donald Trump can change the policy in Ukraine, not sending any more aid and weapons to Ukraine. How do you think their concerns are legitimate?
I don't think there's anything legitimate about the European Union to begin with. So I don't think their concerns are legitimate, because I don't think their opinions are legitimate. They're a pathetic entity that's allowed itself to be taken over by American interests, etc. And now, having sold their soul, having been America's paid whore for so many years, they're sitting with grow moral conscience. Oh, well, we want to be independent. You're not independent. There's nothing independent about Europe. Look what they're saying. They want a president who will continue to provide the umbrella of comfort, to keep the leash on and the collar on, to hold it tight and say heel and sit and all this, versus a president says, I don't care about you. I'm willing to go feed yourself. They don't want to feed themselves because they can't feed themselves. That's what's really this is about. This is about Europe acknowledging that they suck across the board. And they're scared to death, because what Donald Trump is saying is grow up, stand up on your own 2 feet, get the hell out of the nest and fly. They can't fly. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. They're pathetic. And that's what this is all about. This is the exposure of the pathetic reality of Europe. And it's a good thing. And I say that as somebody who likes Europe. I mean, and my family origins are European. I've lived in Europe. I've traveled in Europe extensively. I would love nothing more than Europe standing up on its own 2 feet. So when I go to France, I'm going to France, not an American colony. When I go to Germany, I'm going to Germany, not an American colony. I don't want to visit an American colony. I want to visit a nation full of people who are proud of who they are. It's a foreign country for a reason. It's not supposed to be like America. It's supposed to be their own country. It's what I love about going to Russia. When you go to Russia, you know damn well where you're at. You're in Russia. There is no mistaking it. It's Russia. For better or for worse, it's Russia. But now you go to Europe and you get America Light. It's I mean, this European Union has watered down what it means to be a European, because being a European is a meaningless term. There's no European. What is a European? They don't exist. There's a German, there's a Frenchman, there's an Italian, there's the Dutch, there's the Austrians, there's the Poles. I know what they are, but a European, what is a European? There is no European. There is no Europe. There's a collection of nations that could come up with a loose framework, but to try and come up with a singular foreign policy, especially now that you've expanded it to the East, the East's interests are not the West's interests. Even within the West, talk about the central debates between Germany and France, and you realize there's already a division there. England pulled out. They didn't want to be part of Europe. Brexit and all this. So, I don't care what Europe thinks. I mean, the fact is Europe has to learn to stand on its own. I say that as an American because it's not healthy for America or Europe for this current relationship to continue. It's not healthy. NATO is a poison pill. We need to ditch NATO as soon as possible. And the sooner Europe realizes that, the better off Europe will be, because then Europe will be compelled to stand on their own 2 feet and build defensive capabilities that are realistic, not backed up by the artificiality of the perception of American military power. And once Europe understands its limitations and its capabilities, it can then figure out what a sane foreign policy will be with Russia. Understand that the policy that many Europeans have right now of being an adversary to Russia is unsustainable if Europe was called upon to stand on their own 2 feet, because they can't defeat Russia. They can only think about it with America backing them up. And America shouldn't be in that business. We shouldn't be in the business of tipping the scale on that. There's no reason for Europe and Russia to be enemies. There's every reason for Europe and Russia to be partners. But they can't be partners so long as America's in the mix. You got to pull America out, let Europe stand up and make its own realizations that collectively and individually they need to be working with Russia, not against Russia. And that's not a threat to America. It actually helps us because that creates that creates stability. Americans need to understand just how well off we'd be if we stopped spending over $1 trillion a year on defense. We don't need to go around the world and kick hornets' nests and then complain every time we get stung and then spend all our money building, mechanisms to protect ourselves from hornets. Stop kicking a hornet's nest. You don't have to worry about it. There are things we can do. We don't have to have an economic war with China. We can use China's economic capabilities to our benefit, tap into their supply chains, bring our strengths to the table, make sure that we are essential to the Chinese economy as they are to ours. We could again go into Africa with a whole new approach. And instead of this neo-colonial approach, go in like the Chinese do. You know what the first thing China does when it goes to a foreign country? It builds a damn road. Why? Because that allows them to get in, meet, and take things out. The road is essential, the connection. What's the first thing we do? We demand that they have LGBTQ rights. See the difference?
In your opinion, is it going to change the mindset of Germans in the government in Germany to be more independent? Because we know how important Russia is for Germany. They cannot survive without Russia, with the current situation that they're having. And the question is if Donald Trump wins, it seems that not directly, indirectly would help Germany to change its strategy toward Russia.
I think the best thing that could happen for Europe is a Trump victory. If Kamala Harris wins, then Europe and America will sustain this very damaging artificial relationship where America dominates Europe and dictates to Europe, and Europe is subservient to America across the board. It's destroying Europe economically. It's destroying European cohesion because not every European country benefits the same way from American, dominance of this nature. It's like anything. I mean, if you're, it's one thing if you're a 22-year-old kid who just graduated from college with heavy college debt and you don't have a job. Okay, live in a mom's basement might be something you have to do for a year or two to get yourself going. But the Europeans are 45 years old and they're still in mommy's basement. It's time for the Europeans to get the hell out of mommy's basement. And Donald Trump will kick them out of mommy's basement. That's the the positive. Europeans are afraid of this because it's sort of scary. You're being called to go out on your own and make your own decisions. You won't have mommy there to help you, but it's what has to happen for Europe to grow up. And Donald Trump is the president that can make it happen because he's not a prisoner of the legacy of NATO. He recognizes NATO for the inefficient organization that it is. It's stupid for America to spend this much money on NATO. It's just dumb. We need to get the hell out of there, unplug from that, start reducing our defense expenditures, and force Europe to stop living off of American largesse. We got Europeans who talk big now, but they talk big because they're backed by America. But imagine if they actually had to put the money up to back up their words without American support. They suddenly wouldn't be saying those things. I could sit there and articulate, if I've got a trust fund and daddy willing to foot the bill, I can talk about Lamborghinis and Bugattis all day long. But when daddy's bank account's not there and the trust fund money's not there and I got to go out and work, suddenly that Toyota Camry's looking pretty damn good. And it's time for Europe to stop talking Lamborghini and Bugatti and start talking Toyota Camry, the equivalent. They need to downsize their aspirations based upon the reality of Europe, not a Europe backed by the United States. Germany has to start looking out for German interests, and Germany's interests more closely aligned with Russia than they're currently allowed to articulate. But you're seeing that growing recognition. Look, Olaf Scholz isn't the solution to Germany. Olaf Scholz needs to be voted out. His coalition needs to be destroyed. It appears that it is. The next generation of German politicians will be the ones that will be called upon to make some of these hard decisions.
When New York Times is talking about that Ukraine is losing, do you think that the United States, deep state, those people who are, we can call it deep state or kind of blobs, have decided to change their strategy in Ukraine?
That implies that there was a strategy to begin with. I think the only strategy that they've had is a reactive strategy that's premised on an absurd notion of the United States will use this conflict to weaken Russia and achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. A hope and a dream. But there's nothing substantive behind that. We don't back it up with the resources. If that's truly what we wanted, we aren't giving them the resources. We should be doubling down on Ukraine, pouring in munitions and when they need it on a timely fashion, more air defense, things of that nature. If that's truly what we wanted, but we've just sort of been feeding it in there because we're trying to win on the cheap. We're praying for some sort of economic collapse in Russia that's just not happening. The political diminishment of Vladimir Putin, which just isn't happening. He's getting stronger. Their economy is getting stronger. BRICS is making their economy more robust, more diversified, more difficult to impede through the use of sanctions. So we don't have a strategy. We don't. We have a blind hatred towards Russia that guides everything. To have a strategy, we'd actually have to have people that knew Russia intimately, who could interface with the Russians. And then you understand Russia's strengths, Russia's weaknesses. You understand areas that could be exploited or areas that should be developed, depending on what priorities you have. We should hope that the priorities are towards peaceful coexistence. But you can't peacefully coexist with that which you don't understand, that which you have used, Russophobic tendencies to promote fear that's derived from ignorance. You see, the ignorance of Russia is to the benefit of these policymakers. They don't want an informed American public about Russia. That's why they pulled my passport. That's why they don't let me travel to Russia, because I was collecting data, bringing it back, and beginning the process of informing a larger public. They don't want that. They want the public to be ignorant about Russia, and from that ignorance comes fear, and that fear gets exploited by the policymakers, who then say, we need to be stronger, we need to build this, we need to build that. But the reality is you don't need to build any of that. The best way to bring about stable relations with the Russians is actually to reach out the hand of friendship, shake the hand, sit down at the table and talk to them. They're reasonable people, and they will listen to reasonable solutions. They're not like America that says my way or the highway. I mean, increasingly we're putting them in that situation. But the Russians have always said we're willing to talk and we're willing to sit down, we're willing to listen. And historically, they've been willing to make compromises far more than we have. So, I don't. It's impossible for me to talk about. Look at the resumes. I look at the people that are advising. I call them Putin whisperers. They all have something in common. They went to one of these big universities where they wrote a PhD thesis on the evils of Vladimir Putin. That's it. That's all they know. Vladimir Putin's bad. They don't know anything about Russia. They're ignorant about Russia. They don't know the truth about Russia, and they don't want to know the truth about Russia. Accurate information about Russia is their enemy. That's why they suppress it.
Just to wrap up this session, Scott, again, we're witnessing that in Washington, they're talking about North Korean soldiers in Russia. When they're talking this way, they're pushing this rhetoric. Two things comes to the mind. When one would be they want to just say Russia is nothing, they need North Korean soldiers to help them. They're not doing well on the battlefield. On the other hand, you can imagine they want to escalate the conflict in Ukraine. They want to send even NATO troops to Ukraine to fight officially.
Nobody wants to send NATO troops. Let's just stop that nonsense. Nobody wants to send NATO troops to Ukraine. Nobody wants to send. If they wanted to send NATO troops to Ukraine, they'd already be there. Nobody wants, because they know what the consequences will be: instant death. I mean, I'm just saying it straight up. We shouldn't even entertain that thought. Find me one, seriously, I'm not talking about rhetoric, one European nation right now that's saying I'm willing to send boots to Ukraine. Name one. You can't. Because they don't exist. Nobody's willing to send boots to Ukraine. They'll send them as mercenaries, they'll send them as advisors. I'm talking about give me a whole damn armored division, because that's what it's going to take. Put an armored division on the ground in Ukraine today. Go. A, they can't do it. They don't have the resources. And B, politically, they can't do it. There's no support at home. And C, they know they'll get beat. There's no sustainability. So that is not an option. I reject it out right off the bat. It's just not an option. If it was an option, it would have already been implemented, because Ukraine's reached the tipping point, the point of no return. They've lost. Even if you sent in NATO divisions right now, they couldn't stop what's happening on the battlefield. So nobody wants to send in troops. We shouldn't even entertain that notion. It's a non-existent thing. It's just now a matter of managing the collapse of Ukraine. That's all they have. Russians are 21 kilometers away from the Dnipropetrovsk border. That means that they're 21 kilometers away from reclaiming all of Donetsk. Once they reclaim all of Donetsk, they'll get all of Zaporizhia. Then they'll turn to the business of recapturing the right bank of Kherson. If Russia is allowed to engage in military operations designed to recapture the right bank of Kherson, they're going on to Odessa, because the same military might it takes to project power over the river, get there, and sustain that presence there is the same that you need to project onto Odessa and beyond. The West doesn't want this to happen. What the West needs to do right now is pick the point where you're going to say, stop. Ukraine withdraws from all this territory in a controlled fashion. It turns over to Russia, and we bring it into this war. But to do that, you have to have the Ukrainian government willing to accept those terms. Right now, the Ukrainian government's not willing to do that. And the West, it's very difficult for the West to impose its will on Ukraine right now. Politically, it's difficult because we're going to stand with you till the end. We keep saying we don't mean that. If we did, we'd have boots on the ground. We don't mean it. What we need is and this is the tragedy of it. Again, it's like I say, we don't care about the Palestinian people. We don't care about the people of Ukraine. We don't care about them at all, because our policy right now is to let Ukraine suffer more until they reach the realization that they have no choice but to do this. I mean, how cowardly is that approach? How craven is that approach? It means we don't care about the Ukrainians. We never have. But that's what's happening here. We're letting the Ukrainians reach the realization that it's indefensible what they're doing, and they are going to be compelled to withdraw beyond the Dnieper River, whatever. And at that point in time, we will come in and say, now it's time to sit down with the Russians and and boom. And one of the first things they'll offer the Russians is you get all that territory, because that's the only thing. And then they'll try to negotiate other things. Russia won't accept it because Russia's in the driver's seat. But again, Russia doesn't. I'm just telling you right now, Russia does not want to invade Odessa. The Russian government does not want to do that. They want this war over, but the war has to end on their terms. But they also understand that their terms can't include the invasion of Odessa, can't include the occupation of Sumy. That's a whole new phase of the war. Hundreds of thousands of more troops would have to be mobilized. The economy would, there's huge inflation, 21% inflation going on in Russia right now because their economy is overheated because of the war economy. They need to bring all this stuff under control. And they can't bring it under control if they're expanding the war. So Russia doesn't want to expand the war. Russia wants this war to end, but it has to end on Russian terms. And those Russian terms are they get all their territory, all the territories of the four oblasts that Russia absorbed through the referendums in September 2022. Then they'll dictate things about the demilitarization, denazification, things like that Ukraine will have to take. They'll negotiate the lifting of sanctions and things of that nature. But what it'll do is it'll spare Russia and Ukraine and the world because to go on to Odessa, you're talking about extending this war by a couple of years. Russia doesn't have the means to do it right now. Russia would have to mobilize all new forces. They've built a military capable of achieving the objectives that they want to achieve, but they don't have a military capable of moving on to Odessa right now. When you start talking about occupying territory, you need boots on the ground to do that occupation. As you thrust into Odessa, you have exposed flanks. You increase your flank exposure. One of the problems that the Russians ran into in the fall of 2022 is as they withdrew their forces, they thinned out the lines. They had this massive, frontage that they had to man, but they thinned out the lines. They didn't have enough manpower to man the lines, and so the Ukrainians were able to launch attacks that penetrated and compelled the Russians to withdraw, recruit new troops, mobilize troops to thicken the lines and all that stuff. Russia right now has a density right now that's impenetrable by the Ukrainians. But just look at the map. You move to Odessa, you're extending those lines. And unless you have the troops capable of manning those lines with the density necessary, you're inviting disaster, especially if you're making a lunge up there where the Ukrainians can do, pinch you off someplace. Russia doesn't want to fight that fight. That's my firm belief. The Russian government doesn't want to fight that fight. Putin doesn't want to fight that fight. The Ministry of Defense doesn't want to fight that fight. And so I think that, we're looking for the tipping point to be reached. That tipping point could be reached this winter, maybe early in spring, where Ukraine says we can't do this anymore, and the West says we got nothing left to give you, and they go to the negotiating table.
You mentioned Odessa, and everybody knows how Odessa is important for Russia and for Ukrainians. But do you think at the end of the day, in any sort of negotiations between the West and Russia, what are the main concerns of Russia considering this city? What are the main considerations? Are they going to give it to Ukraine, just to whatever they
First of all,
want?
it's not giving it to Ukraine. Ukraine has it.
Yeah, no, I'm talking
So
about
in order for Russia
politically.
to give it, Russia would have to take it.
Yeah,
It's not Russia's to give away. It doesn't belong to Russia. It belongs to Ukraine. And that's a reality that people, I know that all the pro-Russian out there, it's a Russian city and all. It's a Ukrainian city. It may have a Russian heritage. It may be all this. I'm not denying that. But let's just be frank right now. It's a Ukrainian city that's become even more Ukrainian since this war's happened, because many of the pro-Russian elements have been driven out, have fled, or have turned. People that might have been sympathetic to Russia maybe aren't because of the bombardment, etc. But Odessa is a Ukrainian city. It belongs to Ukraine. It's not Russia's to give. Russia doesn't get to dictate that outcome. If Russia wants to dictate the outcome of Ukraine, they have to capture it. They have to take it. And I'm telling you right now, Russia doesn't want to do that. That's just too damn expensive. Too expensive. Their concerns are, this is why Russia's talked about, 50,000 strong Ukrainian armed forces, which is really little more than a border guard and a police force. And I think there will be demilitarized zones. I think Odessa will be a demilitarized zone. The biggest Russian concern is that Odessa is used as a springboard to launch attacks against Crimea and southern Russia. That can never be allowed to happen. So I think you're going to be talking about a demilitarized zone with, some sort of observer presence there. I think you're going to see that all along the contact with the Russian border, demilitarized zones. And then whatever's left of the Ukrainian military will be this rump force that'll, be in Western Ukraine and, around Kiev. But, that's that. But Odessa isn't Russia's to give away. They don't own it. Ukraine does. And Russia will have to pay a very heavy price to take it. Too heavy. Too heavy. And it changes everything. BRICS. People need to understand Russia went into BRICS, and one of the things that is promoting there is de-escalation of global crises. Russia can't afford to escalate. Russia has to bring this Ukrainian conflict to an end on reasonable terms. And right now they're in a position to dictate reasonable terms. But the world isn't going to sit there and applaud Russia if they say, no, we insist on Odessa, Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk. That all has to become part of Russia. That's a massive escalation. The world isn't going to support that. Right now, Russia has the world on its side. Russia's not going to commit, strategic suicide, geopolitical suicide by, insisting on things that represent an escalation or are considered unreasonable demands. And it is an unreasonable demand because it's a Ukrainian city right now. Russia has no inherent right to say, oh, you have to give it to us. I don't think Ukraine would ever do that. And I think the West would help Ukraine resist that. And should, to be honest. That's something that should be done. I condemn Ukraine for what they've done in the Donbass. I think they made a fatal mistake. I think there was a necessity to link Crimea with a land bridge. But, Russia was willing to give up Zaporizhia and Kherson. That was part of the April 2022 agreement. Russia wasn't demanding those territories. But now we deal with the reality that those are Russian territories. And I support Russia 100% on that. But if Russia said, no, you have to give us Odessa, no, they don't. No, they don't. And if Russia wants to turn itself into a nation that actually starts to walk and talk the talk of being the aggressive state that Europe is afraid of, demanding that Odessa be turned over, puts Russia in that category. I don't see Vladimir Putin being that leader. He hasn't said anything that puts him in that category. He is a rational person. He believes in the rule of international law. And so I don't see, I just don't see that playing out. Not at this stage. I mean, if BRICS wasn't in the equation and Russia didn't have that kind of pressure placed on, its geopolitical future for de-escalation, maybe Russia would succumb to some sort of, nationalist, security-oriented approach. But I don't see the Russian leadership saying Odessa has to belong to us, because that's an escalation, one that the world won't support. And all it does is lengthen this conflict, and Russia does not want this conflict to go on. They're winning right now, and they have positioned themselves to be able to continue this conflict, but this can't go on forever. It's not good for the Russian economy. It's not good for the world. And, so I'm a firm believer that we're going to see some sort of negotiated peace that is to the benefit of Russia, but it'll be reasonable. It's not going to be unreasonable.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
All right. Thanks a lot. And remember, I am Iron Man. That's that's where we're at, man. 1 in 14 million chance. All right.
Bye.